I'm going to go ahead and click that. Let's click that. And that will start the live stream, which is important because then I can get to my note. I won't be monitoring the chat this week because I am on a Google Note, which I am sharing with Jeffrey for the first time. I don't know. I'm not feeling it. I'm feeling like podcasting. I'm feeling like talking to Jeffrey. I'm feeling the 700th episode. I'm just feeling a little squibbly in my head. So let's get used to that. Thank you to everybody that's joined the live stream. Thank you to everybody that listens. I really appreciate it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn Radio, Google Play, Player FM, the Stitcher Smart Radio app, Radio Public, and Podcast Addict, as well as Victor Reader for our visually impaired friends. We appreciate you. And Audible. We are on Audible and Amazon Music. We're everywhere. It's pretty amazing. We just started getting listens from South Africa. So hello, South Africa. Hello, Malta. I just learned about your megalithic structures last night, and I got to say they are fascinating to me. I think they are so cool from the tones. 150 megahertz. I don't even know how to get that, but now I want to replicate it so that I can also enjoy the freedom that it provides. So, yep. A new episode from Inspirations Beyond Disabilities came out today. That was kind of cool. Or last night, actually, it came out. Kai and Ezric and I, we talked about fall, Halloween, candy corn, pizza for some reason. Ezric's from New York and I'm from Chicago, and that debate started. And cupcakes or muffins? I'm kind of curious as to what people feel on those subjects. How do you feel about New York pizza? He says you can eat it on the L. I say a deep dish piece of pizza is so much easier to eat on the L. So do you even know what an L is? He uses a Subway. We use an L. The L is above, the Subway's below. But it was a great episode. It really was. Don't forget to check out Unsubscribe with my friend Kai. She has I shouldn't even tell you, but she did an episode she just recorded last night with one of my favorite people on the planet. And so check that out coming up this week. And her last episode, pretty great. Also, check out the Snack Network as long as I am plugging things. My partner on Inspirations Beyond Disabilities, Dave, runs the Snack Network, where he tries new and unusual foods before you have to pay for them. And that's kind of cool. So, welcome to episode 700. I'm kind of excited about this. Yeah. I'm trying to upgrade a little bit. So we started a Google Notes so that Jeffrey could look at it. Although I don't know, that's a little crazy because I just added like 3 stories to the note just this morning. You know what I mean? In a fit of chaos. But we've been talking with our second hour guest, and that's cool too. He is confirmed, and Dan will be here. Hey, here's Jeffrey. So let's get started with the show. Wow, that's an interesting way to do that. How cool. Jeffrey. I wonder if he gets annoyed that I do that every single time. Hey, buddy.
Hey, buddy.
Holy cow. All right. Anyway, welcome to Public Access America. I'm Jason and he's Jeffrey, and we are just going to get into the 700th episode because I like doing it that way.
Let's dig in.
I want to say really just to you, I got a new computer and I do not have my backgrounds yet. So I apologize for that. I don't mean to leave you hanging on an old theme.
Well, I could always change my background to something wildly inappropriate, but
Ooh,
whatever.
I like wildly inappropriate. We don't have enough of that. So how are you doing? What's going on with Jeffrey?
Oh, well, we've definitely things have been busy here. Still busting at work, and got some great things happening in personal life that will be a lot more available later. You probably have seen at least a little bit through Devi. So some exciting things, really. Personal growth is always something that's exciting.
And
And
scary. And
oh,
scary.
it's terrifying. That initial jump is always terrifying, but at the same time too,
Hmm.
sometimes you build something good, and you have that, what if this doesn't succeed? And people start reaching out to you and they're like, how can I help? How can I get involved? Where can I
Yeah.
go? What can I do? And you realize that what you're going to do is going to be just fine.
Surround yourself with good people, then those are the people that step up. Instead of when you surround yourself with bad people, they step up too, but they're just super negative about it.
And
I
their voice might be loud at first, but it
Mhm.
diminishes, and it goes away. But the people who
Right.
are there to lift you up and support you, their voices are always loud and they're always there.
You know, somebody told me about a god in India called Shiva, right?
Mm,
And Shiva is the destroyer, but in essence, also the creator. And what Shiva will do is pick you up and speed you to the spot in your life that you need to be. And in that, you feel that confusion and chaos of being transported from one part of your life to the other. But once you settle, you're going to find yourself in a new spot. And I think that's such a good analogy for what's
mm,
going on with Devi right now.
absolutely. And I would say that, one of the things that we've tried to focus on are, positive changes, and how do you build something positive at a time where, sometimes things can feel like a negative. But
Mm-hmm.
the fact of the matter is that when you, like you said, when you surround yourself with good people, you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, no, you get positivity from it. Yeah, and sometimes you have to take a step back to get ahead. I know on this podcast we had a lot of listens, and then I deleted about 200 episodes because they just weren't relevant, and we took a step back, but now we're back where we were, and now people are listening to these conversations, and I think that's cool. We've had up you and I have had 60 around 64 episodes together.
Dang.
That is amazing. So along with the 700th episode, in a few episodes, you and I personally are going to have our 69th episode.
Hey.
Hey. And actually, we got some comments, and somebody was really happy when you were like 69 plus a nine.
Nice.
So I know I shared the note with you, and then I was just saying um, in the pre-show how I just added a bunch of stories to the note, you know what I mean,
Right.
and added them. So it's a combination of knowledge and spontaneity, I guess, this week. But none of them are super big and nothing that you really need more information on than you had.
Right.
Also, in the second hour, Dan did confirm this morning that he's going to be here. So we're going to talk some stuff
Yay.
COVID. I was telling Kai, my friend, that you know, Jeffrey is a really smart. I'm wise, right? But Jeffrey is super smart in an educated way. You're also wise, and Dan's also wise, but you two are super educated. And sometimes I just feel like the idiot answering questions from the audience. But I always want to get you somebody on your intellectual level if I can, so we can have those broader discussions. And then I just like to be there to kind of see if I can translate that conversation for the people that don't understand on a PhD or master's level. You know what I mean?
Right, right. And then that's this, one of those things, like, we've had that conversation before. I don't expect most people to be at my level. I really don't. It's not fair to people. Like, I've gone out, I've spent a bunch of money to get where I am, you
Right.
know? And the idea that, we kind of gatekeep, like, especially like as we tell people to, quote unquote, follow the science, you
Mm-hmm.
know, the reality is that following the science means that it keeps traveling, and
Right.
it keeps changing, it keeps evolving, it keeps getting questioned. But you know not everybody is going to be able to understand and keep up with that, and that's not, it's not because they're dumb, it's just not their wheelhouse. It's like
Right.
anything art related to me. Like, I'm not colorblind, I can see all the colors, but I do not understand, how they go together, naming conventions, why one shade does one thing, another shade does another.
Mm-hmm.
why these two colors that seem completely opposite from each other work well together. It just like I don't understand it, and I never will. Like it's
Right.
not because I'm stupid by any means. It's not my thing. I don't get it. Or
Right.
even like construction and engineering. Like I have a background in construction, but there are just some things I don't understand why you do them the way you do them, but I know they work,
Nope.
and
Then that's why
people
we
will know
pick.
that.
That's why we find people that we can trust, and then we trust them. You know,
Hmm.
that's the important thing. Like, I don't know everything you're talking about all the time. Sometimes I have to go back after the show and look stuff up. You know what I
You
mean?
know, and
But I think
that's great.
that's what's important is that I'm the useful idiot that actually can translate into, like, you guys will say something and I'll ask a question. Sometimes it's a dumbass question, but that's something that maybe somebody else is also thinking. And I like that. I like that to
Well,
me, you know?
well, and that's something we tell our kids in school. Like,
Hmm.
if you have a question, ask it because I guarantee you're not the only one that has that question. You
That's a
just
good
might be
reminder.
you just might be the only person brave enough to ask the question.
Yeah.
And in which case it's and that's where the quest for knowledge, people feel stupid when they don't know the answer, and
Hmm.
we got to get past that. Not
Yeah.
everybody knows the answer. It's not possible. We don't have one person that knows everything, but we need everybody to be able to ask the question so that way the one person who does know something goes, yo, I got this.
Right, because we're a community of people that know things. And it's amazing how somebody with little knowledge has such a steady opinion on something that they don't know anything about, like the voting process or economics, or the treasury. We don't all know about that, but we all seem to want to have an opinion about it without asking an expert.
Mhm.
It's like these days experts are out of step with in a way oof. So
So I think I know where you're going with this. So one of the things that we've consistently talked about in the last 2 years has been this concept of questioning science or questioning the
mhm,
expert is science. But what we miss is the reality that in order to question an expert, you have to have some level of foundation in what that expert talks about and what they do. Like, for example, I won't be able to question Dan on viral function. I will not, because Dan's going to know this stuff. But
mhm,
when it comes to the analysis of the numbers, I'm absolutely going to be able to question Dan because I know how to do that. And I'm
right.
going to be able to look at what those numbers mean, how I'm interpreting them, how many other people would interpret them, and raise questions about the process in which those numbers were obtained. And rightfully so. Questioning science doesn't mean that you just go, well, I don't think I like that, or I don't think I agree, so I'm going to. You have to have some type of a foundation in which
Mhm,
you look at the information and go, I question how you got there. I don't think you did this right.
right.
And it could be any number of pieces along the way. It could be about how the virus spreads. Like, for example, great question that I have right now, especially being a numbers person, is so Washington State released this piece of data on COVID in places that are democratically held
Mm,
counties. The death rate is 7 per 100,000. But in Republican held counties, it is 44 per 100,000, an over 6 times increase. Now, what does that mean? Now, if you give people just enough context, I said Republican held counties. What does that mean to you? What does your brain immediately think? Oh, that's where people don't want to get the vaccine. So now here's my question as a data person, because that could be one element of this. Absolutely. People don't want to get the vaccine. It could be the largest element of this. But then you have the other question is a lot of these places are rural. What does their access to a hospital actually look like?
good point.
So the question is they may have been, you may have people who are vaccinated, but because there is such limited access to hospital beds, they might not have had much of a choice, or there just might not be the level of care there that you would expect to see in urban areas where we have major hospitals. So questioning why that number is the way that it is science. because
Yeah.
I don't want to just say it's anti-vaxxers. I have a pretty good idea that that's the majority of the issue.
It could be
But
bad polling, right? It could be the fact that Washington State has a larger than normal anti-vaxxer society. So there's a lot of factors to that.
I mean, because these numbers are coming directly from the Department of Health, like this is stuff that's coming out of the hospitals. But it still means that there's an issue there that we need to resolve.
Mm-hmm.
Is it because people don't have access to healthcare? If that's the case, how many of those deaths could have been preventable by better access to healthcare? That's a question that we've talked about multiple times. But if it really is the vast majority is people, don't want to get the vaccine, there's not much anybody can do about that. You can do all the messaging you want. You can create all the mandates you want.
Yeah.
You can make it as difficult to be a member of society as you want for not getting vaccinated. There are people that are still going to make that choice not to get the vaccine. But we're also going to have to reconcile the fact that there are a bunch of people out there that are not going to be able to take the vaccine, and we got to quit lumping them in with the Antivaxxer crowd. Got a couple of friends, pro-science, pro-vaccine, can't have it.
Exactly. It's an immune system thing. And I can't wait to talk to Dan about all of that. But I'm more of a people person. You're more of a numbers, and he's more of the science. And I love when the three of us get together to talk about that stuff. It makes my head feel good to offer that information. You know what I mean?
Right.
And we'll have more on that. I do have a quick story. I want to start us off because it's breaking news. For the first time in history, the tomb of the unknown soldier was guarded by an all-woman team. And I just wanted to get that on the record because I think that's
fantastic.
It is so fantastic, isn't it? I don't think it's I wonder if it's like a Biden thing or just a thing that's happening. Is it an evolution that's natural, or is it an evolution that's being forced by politics? And either way, it doesn't matter. It's being done.
This is one of those things where, in terms of, if we're going to look at equality, we've got women who are active duty soldiers, and we got women who are frontline soldiers, and we've got to get used to the fact that women can be fighters too. And in a lot of other countries, they don't differentiate, men's units and women's units the way that we have in the past.
Right.
You're a trained soldier, and you do the soldier thing. So it's, and especially having friends who are soldiers, but because their husband is also a soldier, they just think of them as the military spouse. Nah, motherfucker, she's a vet too. She got herself blown up in Iraq and Afghanistan.
And there is no differentiating in the training between men and women. They all deal with the same stuff.
You're still going to have to fight, and you're still going to have to fight. You look at, one of my favorites was looking at the Kurdish women who were fighting,
right
at the height of ISIS. It's like those motherfuckers were fighting for their lives. So like they were particularly vicious. The Soviet Union used women as snipers consistently because they could just pick things out that were out of place far better than most of the men could, which is why I think it's at least 5 of the snipers with the most kills are women.
I think that's outstanding. I think it's amazing. I'm into history, from the beginning to the end. And what I think is amazing is throughout history, there's always been female-led societies. Even in the Middle East, in Egypt, like in places where you think women are overly suppressed, back in history, they've been the leaders, they've been the pharaohs, they've been the people in charge of finances. And along the way, that's been destroyed for this male-centric thought that we're better at everything because we are men, because we have a penis. I keep thinking that because there's no differentiating between a female body and a male body if you take away the genitals, right? A female can be stronger than a man can be taller than a woman can be smarter than a man. There is no monolithic
I met some women who are far taller than me.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, is that like there is no... People are always saying they're trying to put these monolithic definitions on gender. And I can find the example where they don't work, right? Every time. And that's why there's a constant debate in this, like transgender athletes, they're stronger. They're not, it's just, there's these preconceived notions about gender that I think we really need to get past, because I've seen wrestlers that could kick any man's ass. You know what I mean? I've seen little women that could destroy you with just words. And so
Mhm.
I don't know. I love the fact that this is, I just wonder if it's a natural thing. That's what I want to know. Did Biden like order it? Or either way, we're progressing, but I'm wondering if the progression is being ordered or if it's just something that naturally happened because it was a rotation.
It's a grand question. My
It
hope
is.
is that, it didn't take somebody ordering it to make it happen.
Right. That's what I'm wondering. I mean, I still appreciate the progress, but if you're being ordered to do it, it's slightly different, and that's what I'm wondering.
Mhm. It's different than willingness to do that without
Right,
being ordered.
right. But bravo to the military for doing it. This, Jeffrey, this story. All right. So I was talking to somebody about, we were covering sexual abuse for a while. And I
Mhm.
talked to one of my female friends about it. And I was like, it really irritates me. And I don't understand why people are numb to it. And she explained that she's been dealing with it all her life, right? And so
Mhm.
these constant stories to her are always there,
Mhm.
and so they get a little less attention to the guy that's just coming along to it, you know. And
Right.
so I did want to back off a little on it, but I still want to say that it's an important thing to pay attention to. And I want to say I appreciate Twitter for actually spotlighting these stories in their news feeds, because there is always one or two there, and I think it's important. This week there was more, and I just didn't get to cover it, but they're always there. The World Soccer Foundation is canceling games because one of the coaches was accused of abuse. So there you go,
Mhm.
and look that up, because I'm not going to get into it. But this story, Jeffrey, I thought when I read the title, I thought it was a sexual abuse story, but it turns out to be a scam story. And this lady was called, and she stayed on the phone with her scammer forever while he had her like empty her bank account. And he did it through manipulation. And holy cow, did you read this? Did you check out this at all?
I did not check out this story, but it's a story that I have seen far more times than I ever
Right.
care to. So maybe you can give a little background to it, and I can talk about the infosec side of it.
Yeah, I'm 59.4 million Americans lost $29.8 billion to scammers, and they're they're targeting more professional people with backgrounds. And this guy, what he did was he reached out to somebody, he got her number off of her professional website, and then he explained to her that she had missed a trial date to appear as a witness, and that's her job, that's what she does normally. And so he manipulated her by saying, if you come to the police, they're going to detain you for 72 hours, so you need to work with me to pay this $6,000 off ahead of time. But then, and I see where she would believe that, but then it goes on into some really scammy stuff. But he gets her into this fight or flight scenario and gets her all flustered. And there's some things that the human mind wants to do, solve the problem. There, the human mind just, it puts off some of those red flags when you're just trying to drive to the net. And um, let's see.
So let me put it to you this way.
Yeah, yeah,
For
yeah.
those who aren't familiar with U.S. court system, to put it very succinctly, there is never going to be an option of pay this fine or go to jail for 72 hours if you have not been convicted of a crime. Usually when you're getting held for 72 hours, the cops are showing up, and you either know they're coming or you're about to find out.
Right.
There is no pay this fine and avoid the 72 hours of jail. That's not how our justice system works. It has never worked that way in any capacity. Even when you get convicted of a crime, you might have to pay a fine, but jail time is also there. You're going to be well aware of all of this. It's never
Hmm.
going to be done over the phone.
Okay.
Like, you're going to have uniformed officers show up. So if you ever have that question of, uh-oh, somebody's saying I need to pay money, or I'm going to, or the cops are going to come arrest me. No, that's not how it works. If the cops are going to arrest you, that's because they have an arrest warrant, and there's no amount of money that you can pay to avoid that arrest warrant. You're going to need a lawyer to quash that warrant.
Right.
And that's the only way that you're going to stop that. You're either going to go with the cops, or you're going to go to your lawyer and say, hey, I think I've got a warrant out for me. Can you quash this? And they're going to
Right.
go and they're going to do their thing to take care of it.
But
But a lot
bail.
of the times they'll be able to check that out too if you actually have a warrant against you. And that's the thing, is it's like, if you don't have case specifics,
Mm-hmm.
it should make you very concerned. Like, you're not just gonna
Good.
have a general warrant out for you. It's like, hey, you missed this case number blah blah blah, it's in this court in this district or superior court or whatever.
Right.
Like, they will have these numbers, they will have what the docket is, they will have information if you actually miss something.
That's
If
why I
it,
think it's interesting that they're targeting intelligent professional people. I think the intelligent professional people assume that they're on a level to where they're not going to get scammed. So, or maybe they're more likely to be scammed just because they don't think they can be. You know what I mean? But
well,
the scammers are also using psychology in a way that they never have before. You know what I mean? To turn off somebody's intelligent mind, the right half, and have them just in more of the
emotional
scared.
state.
Yeah, the emotional.
I've
If you can get
I've
somebody into an
had
emotional state, you have them almost where you want them, you know?
yeah. And that's the thing, is like, I've had scammers like this call me
Mm-hmm.
and threaten me with jail if I don't pay the fine. And I'm like, okay, cool. What's the case number? Let me look it up.
Right.
They don't have a case number. Okay, well, what district is this out of? They don't know. Well, okay, so who's going to be the arresting officer service? They don't know who it's
Right.
going to be. It's like, you can figure this out in a series of a few questions. Like, most people, in the United States, you can look up case information. You can even search your own name to find out if you've got a case against you. Granted, it's not universal. You have to know what court you're looking in, because every state does it differently. The feds do it differently. Counties do it differently. Inside of a state, it can be a little bit of a pain, but the reality is that, if you actually have something out for your arrest, you'll either be able to look it up, or you'll have the cops at your door. Period. End of story.
Right. And the scammer's goal is to fake answer those questions before you ask them, right?
Absolutely.
They're going to overwhelm you with details that you think sound relevant, phone numbers that you think are real, and objectives that you think you can solve to get out of the situation. And I think they do that before your rationality kicks in. And that's why I wanted to address this. What they
Mhm.
do is they seesaw you between negatives and positives. Here's the negative, here's the positive that you can, and so you're in the short term, you're just trying to solve those immediate things. And I just wanted to tell this to people that are prone to getting scam calls, that these are some of the things they do that you can look for. And when you hear this stuff and they're not giving you a chance to offer a solution, he says, you can't call the police because, you know, I'll know if you're calling the police. You can't text them because I'll know if you're texting them because I am the police and I'm the one trying to protect you. And suddenly she feels like she can't go to the police. And of course you can. Of course you can, right?
That's like for example, there was a string of, I forget where this was at, but there was a string of people getting pulled over by the cops, but
Mm-hmm.
something was off. They didn't seem like a cop. What most people don't realize is that you can actually, like, if you're getting pulled over and you're not sure it's a cop, you can actually call 911 and find out if whoever's got you pulled over is actually a cop. Now, at least, here we've got, marked vehicles in various capacities. Yeah, we got some undercover vehicles too.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have any questions or any doubts, you can absolutely call the cops and be like, hey, I'm getting pulled over, and I am not certain that the person pulling me over is actually a cop.
Right. There's so many agencies out there that somebody could pretend to be just a random agency and pull you over. And that's why that's weird. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and not to mention the people who think they're the cops.
Right. Right.
So
Community police and stuff, or just people that just bought an old cop car and what.
well,
People are
there's
weird that
a
way.
well, it's funny here because there's a guy who had bought an old cop car, and he spray painted on the back and on the hood, "Not a cop." I was like, you know what, dude? Awesome, thank you.
That's funny. And now you can go pull people over.
Pull
Although
people over as not a cop.
I think it would make a much better taxi service. You know what I mean?
Not a cop taxi service.
All
It's
right.
like, wait,
So
this is suspicious.
so there was let's see, they try and get you into a flight, freeze, and fawn sort of mentality. And yeah, we got to that. This guy went much further, by the way. Oh, so what he had her do was go to the ATM. He had her call the bank while he was on the phone to increase the amount she could get from the ATM, and then he had her go and get like prepaid Visa cards, and you know what I mean. And so as soon as I heard, as soon as I heard prepaid cards, I would have hung up the phone. But
Yep.
there was a moment which I think is really cool, which she went to the Rite Aid, and the clerk just looked her in the eyes and gave her a flyer saying, "Are you the victim of a scam?" And the lady thought to herself, that was the minute she came closest to hanging up, but then she didn't, you know?
Yep. That's
So,
just it's really frustrating because like
yeah,
you're not going to be paying anything in prepaid cards ever.
no, ever, ever, never.
In the justice system of the United States of America, you will never pay anything in prepaid cards
Right.
ever, 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 ever.
Oh, here's my question. If a warrant is out for your arrest, is
Mhm.
there a bail set at that time? Or do you have to go in and have that hearing? You know what I mean?
You have to go in and have that hearing. If there's a warrant out for your arrest, there is no, oh, if I pay this I won't get arrested. No, you're getting
Right.
arrested. If you actually have a warrant, you will be arrested, you will be brought in. And usually if you have a warrant out for your arrest, you probably aren't going to be looking at bail for a hot minute.
Right. That I just want, yeah, there's no amount of money that somebody can say you can pay to get out of the situation because that has to be done once you turn yourself in.
There are only two ways that a warrant gets executed. The first way is that the cop shows up, they arrest you and book you into jail. The second way is that you hire a lawyer, and your lawyer will file a motion to quash a warrant. That's
Right.
what it's called. Um, and so your lawyer will go through the process of quashing a warrant, if it's possible. I say that with a huge caveat because, I mean, and whenever somebody thinks of a warrant, we typically think of, oh my God, there's a warrant out for somebody's arrest. They must be a murderer. No, sometimes you have a warrant out for your arrest because you missed a trial date, and it's called a
Right.
bench warrant.
Those are more likely.
Yeah, and so basically what it boils down to is you're just, you know, you can hire a lawyer to help quash that warrant. They'll be able to figure out if it's something that can be quashed at all and keep you out.
Right. Right.
But otherwise, I mean, the only other way that you're going to get that warrant taken care of is you're going with the cops.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can request that without a lawyer to quash the warrant, but it's always easier with a warrant with a lawyer. You don't know the terms because then there's another thing you have to address after that, and you don't know what to do there. So
Nope.
this guy used phone cloning to show that he was calling from the sheriff's department. He told her to look up the sheriff's department phone number on the website, and then he called her from that number. But it's called spoofing, right? Is that what it is?
Called
Okay.
spoofing.
So you can't even trust that. You can't trust an email. You can't trust a phone
No,
call. You can't trust a text from a stranger. You know.
what and I mean, I had that happen to me
Mm-hmm.
about in 2015. I had someone from the FBI field office in Seattle call me saying that if I didn't take care of this particular warrant, I was going to be placed under arrest. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that's not happening. By all means, you can come send an officer to me.
Come get
Because
me.
I know
Right.
how because I've worked with the FBI. I have worked with the US Marshals Service. I've worked in federal courts. I know exactly how they work. Nobody's calling me to say pay up or else we're coming to get you, especially if it's the feds. They're just
Yeah.
showing up to come get your ass. Period. End of story.
Right. Yeah, think about it in a real life scenario. If you are a wanted fugitive and the FBI calls you and says, "Hey, wait there," you're not very likely to do that, right? So I don't know.
No.
And then at the end of this story, it takes a really bad turn. After he gets all of her money and drains her bank account, he says that when she does come into the sheriff's office, she's going to have to turn herself in and submit to a strip search and a cavity search. He also tells her that there is no females on duty, so he will be doing that, but that she can get out of this by going to a local CVS and videoing a strip search and cavity search in the bathroom. And she did it. So this story that I thought was sexual abuse that turned out to be a scam also turned out to be sexual abuse. Like, even when I try to get away from it, Jeffrey, it's right there at the end of the story.
Just I don't
Oh,
even know what to say with that, just because it's like there's no way in hell that the FBI is ever going to let you search yourself. It just does not
no,
happen.
no
That's
governmental agent, no police department is. No.
No, it's not how it works. Like if there's a cavity search involved, they're going to glove up and do it. Period. End of story. You don't get to
Yeah.
search yourself. It's the equivalent of saying I've investigated myself and found I'm doing nothing wrong. You're
Wow.
not like if you're getting a cavity search, you're
Hmm.
getting a cavity search because they're the ones that are doing it.
Yeah. And then yeah, she did go to the address that he gave her and it was a office park. All the lights were off. It wasn't it was just an office. I just feel so bad for her. This is like almost a kidnapping ordeal, the way it went down, the way she had to drive around and do all this stuff. And I keep thinking to myself, I just hang up the phone. You're right. So it's tough for me. It's tough for me that people are falling for it. And like at some point critical thinking has to come in, right? Like you have to think to yourself, what are the penalties of me not doing what this guy says versus what are the penalties of me doing what he's saying? And losing all your money and doing a cavity search on video seems like something that somebody would have a red line about and say, I'm not going to go this far. Like at the beginning of the phone call, you have to think to yourself, there's got to be a red line where I'm hanging up. That's my head.
The red line is if the cops are coming to get you or say
Mhm.
that they're going to come get you, that's when you say, "Great, contact my lawyer."
Right.
And that's it.
Or go
Like,
to the police department. Like he
yeah,
said she shouldn't do. She should have said, I'm gonna go there. You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely.
so it's tough for me that people fall for this and even very smart people fall for it.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. I feel bad for her, but I mean, there were several
Yeah.
stops along the way where, you know, if you would have taken a
Yeah.
breath for a moment,
Hmm.
you would have realized that this was all bullshit.
Yeah. And I hope somebody hears this and then takes that breath and hangs
Yeah.
up. You can always hang up. You can always hang up and then just block that call. And they will show up at your door if it's real, and they won't if it isn't.
hmm And that's the thing is like like I've said before, if the cops have a reason to arrest you, they're just showing up at your door. Period. End of
Hmm.
story. That's all that's
Right.
happening.
Okay. So, oh my gosh, I don't know if you read this story, but Texas has a new hey, Texas, we're back.
All right.
Texas has
Yeehaw.
a new social media censorship law that prevents filters by anything, by keywords or phrases or anything like that. And this professors are saying can cause an increase of email scamming. So are these things right up your alley, Jeffrey? I'm not quite sure.
I've read what they're going to do, and I'm like, you guys really have no idea how this stuff works, do you?
No. And what's weird is like they shoved it in a bill. They shoved it in a bill that was in a bill that was in an amendment to that bill. And like I had to search from that bill with keywords to find this. Like this was not an easy section to find. You know what I mean? So I appreciate it. And that's why I add the link so that you can go right to the law instead of reading the story. You know what I mean? Because we need to do that. And it's in the description portion of this podcast. You can go read the law or you can find the story about the law.
This one is just so dumb. Like, like I don't know if people realize that like the way that these algorithms work is that they look at. I've been kind of messing around to see how my algorithm changes, just because I want to see like what it does, how it follows me, and how it changes stuff. So I've been watching a few YouTubers lately that focus on guns and cops because I'm just kind of experimenting out to see how YouTube changes its algorithm to what it recommends me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's started to recommend me more conservative leaning stuff. And that's what's really funny about it is that it's all based on what you watch and
Right.
who you watch and what you're looking up. So if you start looking up certain things, you're going to start getting certain recommendeds and filters, which is why, I start looking up cops, like cop video breakdowns
Mm-hmm.
and by a specific person. And suddenly my recommended has changed very significantly, and that filter has changed very significantly from what it was. My YouTube is usually just, death metal videos and
Mm-hmm.
lo-fi hip hop and me looking up how to fix something.
Right.
So, this has been kind of funny to watch. What people don't understand about these algorithms is that if you're watching specific people, it's gonna recommend you specific things. If you start watching different things, it's gonna start recommending different things. It's gonna take it a minute while it's like, hey, I've noticed that you're starting to look up more of this stuff, so let me try
Right.
and pick out some more of this.
How does YouTube determine what is like something else?
How does it? It
I
goes
mean,
off of.
we're not on YouTube now. We're going to be on YouTube in a little bit when Dan gets here, maybe, or maybe just before he gets here. But how do websites know that this is like that?
So here's how the algorithm works roughly for the average person. So let's say you look up a cop video. What it does is it takes a look at who all has watched that video, and then it averages out people who watched this video also watched these videos. And it
Okay,
goes, so if you watch this video, it breaks it down and it goes, the majority of people who watched this video watched this video, and they watched this video, and they
I
watched
got
this
you.
video. And so then if you go, okay, I think I'm going to watch this video that it recommended, it's starting to build a pattern. Okay, so you watched this video and you watched this video. People who watched these two videos also watched boom, boom, boom. And it
Okay,
starts grabbing. And that's how your algorithm starts to build. If you're watching this particular video, it'll grab the next most related content for people who've watched these two videos.
okay.
And
And
so,
this algorithm is just in this decade, right? This is a new way of doing this, right?
correct. It's a newer
Okay.
way of doing this. Because it used to be before, like, on YouTube, the recommended was whatever was hot at the time.
Right.
So for me, watching Dimmu Borgir on YouTube and then suddenly seeing ads for Lady Gaga didn't make a damn bit of sense because I don't listen to Lady Gaga. It's not my thing.
Right. Right.
Lady Gaga is a fantastic artist, but it's not what I'm listening to. I'm listening to death metal.
Mm-hmm.
And I really don't want to follow up Dimmu with Lady Gaga.
No, but I get it. Okay.
So, but by being able to take the power of analytics and say, okay, this person watched this, so most likely they might be interested in some of these. And the more of those videos that you watch, the more of those connections they draw. It's like, you watched all 10 of these videos. People who watched all 10 of these videos also watched. And that's how you drive which way
Yeah.
YouTube goes. Now, I could easily take what I've been doing and then switch it over and start watching things like Sean King or Young Turks or any number of things like that. And my
Sure.
algorithm will slowly start to shift that way. It's like, hey, you watch this. People who watch this and this video, because it's going to pull some of your old stuff over, and it's going to
Hmm.
be like, what the fuck are you on? And
Right.
it'll recommend you some of the old stuff, but it might start recommending you some of the new stuff too. But the
Yeah.
more that new stuff you watch, it changes your algorithm and says, okay, so you watched these two videos recently. We're going to start pulling from this direction.
Yep. But how does it work with email though? Because how can Texas say we want you to remove the filters that stop scammy stuff? Because like I would assume Google has sort of a keyword catch, right? Or
Hmm.
phrase catch to prevent emails from going out through its service. So how does Texas say change that for Texas?
Well, that's going to be difficult. Um,
Right.
because that you're going to have to rely on number one, the email address in question being located within Texas. In
Yeah.
which case, there's a couple of ways that you can do that. Number one, like all email addresses, like if you put it, like you can fill out personal information and you
Hmm.
can have, where you're located as part of that filter,
Right.
as part of that information that's gathered. So I wouldn't be surprised if mine still said that I was located in Montana.
Right.
Because
Right.
I'm pretty sure that I set that once upon a time ago and I've never changed it. Uh,
Yeah.
Definitely haven't been in Montana as a permanent resident for a number of years. But even still, you can. That's one way that you can do it. Now, another way that they filter out what is spam is simply by people reporting. It's like, hey, this email from this sender is spam.
Gotcha.
And so you get enough reports from enough people in the system, it goes, okay, this is spam. Or if you've got a ton of emails coming from one sender at once and they're not
Hmm.
whitelisted by the service,
Right.
it'll go, oh, hey, this is spam, and
Okay.
it'll block it out. So there's multiple ways in which spam is identified, either by the system or by individuals.
But not by Texas legislators, right? Like I just don't I don't know. I don't see how that's gonna I think it's gonna prevent it might be able to extend the scams to Texas, but out of Texas, I don't see how that can be regulated
No.
individually by state like that. So
Well, and I mean, best of luck to them, I think.
yeah, I know, right?
And the people who are about to get flooded with a whole bunch of scam about their penis.
Right. I just think Texas is aiming for everything that America, like the federal laws are. I think Texas one by one is just trying to change them just to buck the system. I don't think it's for the people in Texas. You know what I mean?
No, no,
Anyway,
the group of people who are tired of, all of these laws on the books seem to have no problem putting all of these laws on the books.
yeah, right. And oh shoot, Beto O'Rourke is looking to run for governor of Texas, and I think he's gonna lose.
Oh, fuck.
I think anybody should run for governor except for the guy that said, "Hell yeah, we're gonna take your guns." I don't think he
In
has
the
a
state of
chance.
Texas. No,
Right.
no, 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 no. That's a terrible decision.
Yeah.
You might as well, just hand the race over to Abbott at this point. If
Right.
if if Beto O'Rourke is going to be your top candidate, I look at what Montana did, and Montana had a Democratic governor for a long time.
Mhm.
And he was very much I would say, what some would call Democrat in name only, but it's not
Right.
that. He definitely had some more liberal ways of doing things, but liberal by Montana standards isn't really all that liberal. So
Right. Hi, Joe Manchin.
no, yeah, I wouldn't even call Joe Manchin liberal by liberal standards in Virginia. But
No.
it's one of those things where what Montana's former governor did, Schweitzer, he was a fantastic governor. Like, state ran a budget surplus, things were taken care of. Like, in terms of being able to be an effective and an efficient governor in the state of Montana, he was great. His predecessor, on the other hand, sucked. His predecessor was awful, and that was Steve Bullock. Everybody thought that Steve Bullock was going to be this
Yeah.
fantastic, potential. I was like, no. Like, if anybody was going to run, for the presidency and
Right.
win it, from a conservative state, it would have been Schweitzer, because Schweitzer was, while he was a Democrat, he was still conservative enough that even conservatives would have been like, I think I can handle him. Montana's done great under him, so why not him?
Nice. Yeah. Steve Bullock ran for president for like a minute, and we laughed the entire time until he
Yeah,
dropped out.
Schweitzer, and that was the thing, is that Schweitzer, a bunch of people tried to push Schweitzer to run, and he was just like, no, I don't want to do that.
Right.
You know,
I
he's like, I was governor. That's good enough for me. I don't want to run for the presidency.
Yeah. I don't think that conservative means killing people and Democrat means saving people. It
No,
should be, if you're in government, it's to protect the people that you want to protect. Ron DeSantis. You know what I mean? So this isn't a story in my list, but Ron DeSantis said something so ridiculous. He said
what?
that,
No.
well, the new thing is Florida man says that we should look to Australia's lockdown policy as the future of Joe Biden's what do you call that? Like martial law. So he says Australia's doing it, so we should do it. But then 2 days later, a story comes out where Australia says, guess what? We're opening up next month because what we did was successful. It made me laugh because Australia's people didn't die and Ron DeSantis's people are still dying. And people are parroting the fact that it's Australia's fault that we have more COVID. And it's like, what? That wasn't a story I had, but I've been, messaging Ron DeSantis back and forth on Twitter about this.
That's funny. No, yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I think that the Republican Party has no fucking clue over
Right.
is when it comes to these lockdown policies, these places have higher taxes and higher social welfare than we do.
Right.
There's a reason why you didn't see lockdowns like this
Because our
that
people are too
stretch.
poor to stay at home.
Yeah, and our governments are too broke for everybody to stay at home. You know, everybody keeps going,
Yeah.
well, why aren't we staying home? It's like, well, you see, the one safety net that we had that could have been used to keep people at home, keep people paid,
Mm-hmm.
it's been leveraged against, and there's no money in it.
That's right. That's what we forget. Before the pandemic, we were slashing budgets and stealing funds from other places to pay for other things. We weren't in a great state. And that's why we're backfilling our safety net now through infrastructure, right? Which I want to say, by the way, is supposed to be paid for by raising taxes on the rich. And that's the whole debate. Do we want to people are like, no to the infrastructure, it's too much money. Yes, no, yes. It's to pay for the stuff we always do for the next 10 years. And like 3.5 billion trillion sounds like a lot till you spread it over 10 years. You know what I mean? There's this
Mhm.
whole discussion about this bill being way too expensive, but it's free
Seven
if
hundred
you
bill a year, 700 billion a year.
if you raise taxes on the rich. And lobbyists are saying, we don't want this bill passed because we don't want you to raise taxes on us. And that is the real conversation. I
Well,
found,
what we're missing in the real conversation is the fact that what the Democrats also tried to do was try to get it so that way they could monitor every bank account that has a
mm,
transaction of $600 or greater, or has a cumulative of $600 roll through that account. So that way they can
mm,
be taxed. That means that, let's say that Jason buys us some concert tickets, because he's down there, he's got the ability to go over to the box office and grab the tickets.
sure.
If I go to pay Jason back for those tickets, that counts as income for Jason, is how they would view that. That
Wow.
means that Jason would get taxed for me paying him for my concert ticket that I would have bought at the box office myself.
I like this. This is a spontaneous conversation about the
So,
infrastructure bill.
so unfortunately, what has happened is, and I know I'm going to piss some people off, but you know what?
Do
Fuck
it.
it, full
Do
full
it. It's
send.
the end of the show. Do it.
This whole idea of and millionaires and billionaires will pay for it sounds an awful lot like and Mexico will pay for it, just for the left. Because right now there's a whole bunch of fucking stuff coming around that they're really looking at how normal people are going to be paying for this. So yeah, it was just a little bit surprising when all of a sudden I find out that and millionaires and billionaires will pay for it is they're wanting to look at every single account that's ever had $600 in one way or another roll through for it.
Wow.
So I was just absolutely stunned when I saw that, and I was like, what the hell is this bullshit? Because that means that anybody who's ever paid back a friend now
Hmm.
runs the risk of their friend getting taxed for paying them back for something that they just bought. God knows how many times Debbie and I have done that, where we buy something for a friend and a friend pays us back.
Right.
That's taxable income?
Wow.
Bullshit. That's horseshit is what that is. That money was going to get spent at a local business, but if that's how you're going to treat it, I'm going to be like, nah, dude, you got to go get this yourself. And so that means that, my friend's going to miss out on an experience or
Hmm.
something like a necessity. God knows how many times where I've had a friend like, I can't get to the grocery store. I got a dire need. Is there any way you can grab this for me?
Right.
Yeah, I'm out right now. I'll totally grab it for you. Just tell me what you need. But
Okay.
then that's taxable income for me? That's bullshit is what that is. And that's the Democrats that work for you. And
Okay.
there's been a huge pushback on that. So enough with this, and millionaires, but billionaires will pay for it, but then you fucking do this shit.
Gotcha.
End rant.
End rant. Check out the new infrastructure bill and actually dig into it. Hey, everybody, thank you for listening to Public Access America. You can find our live stream every Sunday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. You can also find our podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, TuneIn Radio, Google Play, the Stitcher Smart Radio app, Radio Public, and Victor Reader for all of our visually impaired friends. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Public Access America. I think we have our guest here. And I'm excited about that. Our friend Dan is going to be here to talk about a couple COVID scenarios and situations that have happened since the last time he was here. Hi, Dan.
Hello, hello. It's been way too long, guys. How are you?
Well,
Hey,
you don't always get Superman on your schedule. You know what I mean? Sometimes you got to wait for him to fly in.
Oh, you're too kind. You're too kind. No, I'm very happy to celebrate a milestone and be part of the podcast. It's been great to kind of check in intermittently and see how you guys are doing and continue to support the channel. So,
I appreciate you. I was thinking about our time when we were podcasting and those things that we were trying to address with the Center for Election Science and for vaccines and with Lexi on women's rights. All of those things that we were battling in 2018 are have evolved into a new level of confusion in the
they've
country.
mutated, you could say.
Right. So I'm going to
oh,
let
that
you and
that
Jeff.
pun hit close to home there, Jeff.
There you go. I'm going to let you two talk for a minute and get started, and I will be right back.
Sounds good. What's new, man?
Oh man, it's been a wild journey, dude. You think about where we were just a few months ago, the lifting of mask mandates, we would finally turn the corner, life was going to be normal, and then this shit happened. I don't
Yeah.
even know. I don't, it's one of those things where it's been really frustrating, but at the same time it's like, well, I suppose that in terms of what diseases look like, this should have been expected.
Yeah, I think there's two very closely ingrained concepts here. One is, you said what we should have expected. What we should have expected versus what we should have planned and communicated, and those can be very different things, or they were kind of very different things. If you talk to any evolutionary biologist or microbiologist or genomic scientist worth their salt, it was obvious that as soon as we realized we could not contain COVID, that it's going to just continue to circulate, that this virus is going to evolve, it was going to mutate just like any other infectious disease does, just like any other organism does. And so having to be ready for that. But I think it kind of goes back to the challenge of, we did not, in my opinion, as a society, do a good enough job with science communication early on, kind of setting realistic standards and saying, what is the end goal here? People kept talking about like the pandemic ending, but they left it open-ended. Like, what does that mean? And for me, with my background in like microbiology, infectious disease, like this is the stuff I do, right? Like this is right my wheelhouse. For me, the pandemic ending was not the eradication of the virus. That's pretty much impossible. It was always, we need to come to a point where we can manage the severe illness toll, the death toll, well enough. And I think that was not well communicated, because the way we think about disasters in this country is think like Hurricane Katrina, Superstorm Sandy, those things where there's a catastrophic moment, and then there's months of fallout, and then, I mean, the deaths stop, the severe issues stop, the money kind of gets taken care of, and we as a society move on. But with a disease like COVID, that's just not how it works. And I think we could have done a better job at the beginning talking more about how that manifests itself differently than what we're used to as a society. And it comes back to the thing, like, really, we scientists have been kind of poo-pooing the concept of talking to the public for way too long, to the point where we have like ignored learning how to do that, and have been focusing more on publishing papers and trying to get grant money than we have been about engaging the public and trying to get on the same level. Not that the public is lower, but it's like the public has different priorities and different things to worry about, so we need to kind of be more relatable. So I think this goes back to that same fundamental failure of, like, this was expected, but we didn't communicate it well enough, and we didn't use the right language to tell the truth in the right way that gets the public to understand and maintain that trust with the people who are working night and day to fight this virus. So, rant complete.
And that's, that's one of the things that, I've been trying to tell people is that the expectation is going to be that, our bodies are not used to this particular virus, kind of like we are with the flu virus. You've either not had enough variations go through your body, or you've not been vaccinated, or you've not been vaccinated with 4 different variations as it stands. And so, like, our bodies are just not used to this, which is why you're seeing people who got the original strain also get Delta, and you're still having issues. Like, eventually your body's going to learn. It's like, okay, we've seen something very similar to this. We've seen it multiple times. This is how we're going to fight this. And that's just kind of the reality where we're at. And so I'm kind of curious, what did that look like in the era of the Spanish flu? Like, when you saw those waves come through, granted, our testing and scientific capabilities are far better than they were 100 years ago, but maybe historically speaking, we can kind of see something like, we saw the original Spanish flu, then we saw a variant, then we saw a variant, then we saw a variant. And eventually people had enough variants go through their communities that, now, yeah, we get used to the flu going around. I mean, it still takes 115,000 people a year on average, but it's not the thing that it once was.
Yeah, I think you really hit it on the head there with the scientific capabilities being so different, like 100 years ago. Back 100 years ago, I need to check my history. Did we even know that viruses existed back then? Like, we knew that influenza was a disease. We knew kind of it was spread by airborne and everything, but we had no concept of how beautifully, I mean, I guess beautiful for me, but how complex and diverse and funky the microbial world is. I mean, the germ theory of disease had just barely been worked on, by the previous couple of decades. And you think of how far we've come. I mean, one of the things that I keep reflecting on with COVID as compared to previous pandemics, including the 1918 flu, is we have so much scientific, I don't want to say perspective, but so many scientific eyes on this, right? We talk about naming all these variants, right? But it's not just that the variants are named. That's just a very standard thing with the flu. There's a very standard international method for naming different types of flus that are isolated from different locations and different time periods from different sources. They're the types of surface proteins and everything. Like, there's all the standard stuff, and every kind of virus has its own standard format. But now, for the first time in modern history, all of that science has been thrust into the public eye, and everyone is scrutinizing it. And so scientists are struggling to catch up again with the communication piece of, like, okay, what is Delta? Is it a different virus? What is a variant? Okay, let's talk about what a variant is. Well, now we need to go back to high school biology. We're learning about DNA to RNA to proteins, which is stuff that people haven't cared about, because most people don't need to worry about what proteins their bodies are producing. They're trying to put food on the table. So I think I will answer your question directly, but I think that's something important to keep in mind, is that it does come up with a science communication again. But in terms of in terms of any pandemic, it's a complicated balance between, host. The term in the field is host pathogen interaction. So the pathogen being the agent that causes the disease, the host being the human or the whatever animal that it infects. So as the host develops immunity, the pathogen has to mutate. And those mutations are going to have, better or worse outcomes, right? Just some are going to be selected for by natural selection, and some viruses are going to do really well. And so eventually there just became a balance between host immunity and the virus that caused the pandemic of 1918, that virus is no longer really viable. So other flu viruses could survive more easily than they were able to take over. And that's another complicated, like you talk about all these balances, you know, you have to think about what the end goal of a virus is, or end goal of a pathogen that causes any kind of disease is. The perfect pathogen is not a virus or a bacteria or whatever that kills its host really well, because if you kill your host too
Right.
quickly or too seriously or cause too much severe disease, that host is going to be either isolated or die too quickly, and the virus cannot pass on. So eventually the 1918 flu had this perfect balance of like being what's called transmissible while also causing the disease that killed a lot of people. But eventually, because of the balance in host pathogen interactions changing, that there was another virus that became more transmissible and just less deadly. So, but we still have isolates of the 1918 flu virus that people work on and put through cells and reproduce and study, and we still have those vials of virus to study, especially in flu labs around the world. And I actually was able to work on some of them in a past life in a virus lab. But yeah, no, I think you raised a really good point about there is always this balance between host pathogen interactions. Doesn't matter if it's flu, if it's COVID, if it's yellow fever virus or Zika or whatever. There's always these balances going on. But in order to kind of get the public to appreciate that, we can't just not communicate it and then just fling it all at the public and say, okay, here's all the stuff you should care about. And they're like, well, why? I just was told I had to be furloughed from my job for 3 months because of some virus that I don't understand.
Well,
Right? And that experience
you
is valid. You can't invalidate that experience as a scientist and expect people to want to continue to trust you on month 20 of a pandemic.
Right.
I think you bring up a good point between the two. And when I think back in history, how information was disseminated, it was usually through a doctor or a professional. And I think we've diverted information around those people to bring it right to the public. And in that, I think the media offers pieces of the story. And I think people hear pieces of the story and they think they know everything when they used to be able to go to their doctor to get reliable translations of that information.
Yeah, and you still definitely can with a physician, right? But first of all, medicine has gotten so incredibly complicated that no
Mm-hmm.
physician is going to know everything. I don't pretend to know everything. I don't know. I know the smallest fraction of the world of microbiology, and I'm a
Of
professional
course.
microbiologist, right? But the other thing is that going back, okay, I love this kind of theme of science communication, and I
Mm-hmm.
apologize for once again harping on it on another
Do it.
episode.
I love
Do
it.
it.
That's why we
But
bring you on.
the 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 main challenge, or a major challenge that we're facing, is that the people who are really good at the science and can really understand what's going on, and the people who are experienced at talking to the public and have created the platforms through which the public gains information, there's almost no overlap, right? There's
Mhm.
Right.
think of just in the mainstream media. Obviously, you have people giving the news because they've been trained their job is to deliver the news that other people would deliver, and people can kind of translate and make it simplified. Here's a story that the public needs to know. But
Right.
also in the modern side of like blogging and podcasting and the wide world of the internet, like what we're doing right now, right? There's not enough people who know the science well enough, can also understand the methods of the communication media that is used in today's society, and be able to leverage that to communicate that properly. Like, even scientists who've been really trying to catch up in the last year, we're still missing the mark. And that the reality is we're 10, 15, 20 years too late to the game. And we really just have to hope that we're prepared for the next pandemic, and that this has kind of awoken enough scientists' minds that, like, hey, it's not enough to know the science. We have to know how to talk to the public. We have to know how to relate to the media. We have to know how to write for all audiences, and not a way that is condescending. And that comes down to a fundamental respect by scientists of saying, you know what, just knowing the knowledge of science is not the pinnacle of society. All right, that there's a philosophical break that has to happen at the highest echelons of the scientific community, and that's just either going to take time or another really serious issue to arise. But it is frustrating from my perspective as someone who did spend some time working in public relations and did spend some time working in podcasting and social media outreach and everything, and also knows the science. For a lot of scientists to go, even after 20 months, oh, this, why the hell are you doing that? Like, the reason I'm doing that is because I care about wanting people to have good, accurate information, but I also care about the fact that science itself needs to evolve as fast as, if not more quickly than, this virus is mutating if we're going to continue getting the public's trust so we can actually solve these issues.
Mhm.
A great way to put it. There is people out there that know what we don't know and take advantage of that, and you're the only people that can help that.
Yeah, exactly. So in terms of what the end of the pandemic looks like, is it when we can finally have enough cases without overwhelming our hospital system? Is it, when we've had a certain number of variants? I think, we have a lot of political pundits that will scream at the top of their lungs, Jim Jordan, about all of what the end of this actually looks like. And I don't think that, one of the things that, what the public is hoping for versus I think what science expects versus what public health expects, we don't, I feel like that's one thing where we've never really had this clear expectation. And maybe the answer is that there's not a clear expectation as of yet. One of the things that I know that we've looked at is, what does the end of the pandemic look like here in Washington state? And the answer has been overwhelmingly that, it'll be when when we finally stop having our system completely overwhelmed by one disease.
There's never going to be an end. It's going to be a gray line, not a black line. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Exactly.
no, you're absolutely, both of you are absolutely right, and that comes back to the analogy I raised before, like comparing this to like any of the hurricanes, or 9/11, or
Mm-hmm.
the Afghanistan pullout. That was all these things that the public sees as disasters or horrible things going on. There is a punctuated end when it comes to human
Mm-hmm.
events, and even though there's like consequences that build up on one another, like think about, I don't know, I'm just pick one out of the hat. Benghazi, people were riled up about that, but eventually the actions that drive people's frustrations about that end in some way. And
Right.
even though life goes on and there's consequences, like the past shapes the future, there is kind of an end to the storybook. And the reality is, when it comes to viruses, there is no end.
Yeah.
There's one virus in the history of humanity that we've eradicated, and that's smallpox. And we're very close to eradicating polio. But the main
Yeah.
thing is that smallpox and polio uh, only used humans as a host. So when you talk about this scientific concept called spillover, by the way, Spillover by David Quammen, fantastic book. Even though it was published pre-COVID, it explains all of this in beautiful detail. Would highly recommend to anyone who's listening. It really, really outlines this. But anyway, spillover is movement of an infectious disease from different animals into humans, or vice versa, right? COVID has spilled over into everything. We've had a tiger test positive. White-tailed deer populations in the United States are testing positive for COVID. Obviously, the standard consensus is that this came from bats, potentially moved through other animals as well. There's close variants of coronaviruses. When you have when you have a virus like that, it never goes away. It doesn't end. It doesn't
Mhm.
go extinct. It just moves into another host and bides its time and changes over time into something else, right? So the reality is, COVID's never going to go away. SARS-CoV-2 is never going to go away unless we eradicate all hosts from the planet in which it could possibly be. And if we vaccinate, it's impossible. We can't possibly vaccinate the everything with 100% effectiveness. So it goes back. So what is the end of the pandemic? Like you said, Jeffrey, there's no consensus. What public health professionals want as an end of the pandemic versus what scientists want versus what politicians want versus what the public wants. The public wants to go back to normal. The public health professionals want, to have to stop reporting this disease in large enough numbers that it overwhelms their days. And believe me, I have a lot of friends who are just overwhelmed, just filing reports of all these cases. And politicians want to move on to other stuff, and medical professionals want their hospitals to not be filled anymore. But that doesn't mean that the virus is gone. So
Mhm.
having definitions and having missions that have clear, manageable goals, like specific, manageable, reasonable, like that's what we're missing. That's what we always missed, because we dove in, classic America, we dove in without a clear end goal in sight, and just like, oh, we got to manage the situation, and having no.
Right.
Granted, it's almost impossible. It was unprecedented for a new virus to emerge out of nowhere that we had no idea what was going on with it. But you still have to kind of at least try to envision an end at the beginning to help you guide your process. And I'm saying all of this as somebody who's practiced in COVID public health for the last year and a half or so. I was part of that system that was involved. And in some ways, this is a self-critique too, because these are things that I could have thought about better, and could have potentially done a little bit to change, at least at the local level I was working at. So, I don't want the listeners to think, I am pretending to be holier than thou. This is as much a self-reflection as it is on other folks who are involved too.
It's always a learning curve, right?
Absolutely.
I can't help but think though that we didn't have 80 million Americans denying Katrina.
Well, we certainly had more than 80 million Americans criticizing the response to Katrina.
Sure, but
Mhm.
Katrina existed.
Exactly. Katrina existed, but the political leaders involved in the Katrina response got heavily criticized. And
Oh,
a lot of
sure.
people had a lot of their own ideas about how things could be done better. And so when the fight,
Good
when it
point.
comes home and say, okay, well, if you all wear your masks and get vaccinated, you will not get COVID. Well, if that is speaking personally, from your own personal experience, if that does not line up with what you're seeing, like if you don't know people who are getting COVID, you don't know people who are dying, you don't know any families who've lost loved ones,
Exactly.
then it's hard to relate that to your own personal experience. Whereas with anything involving people, like you think about the most, some of the biggest reasons why, I mean, 9/11 hit so close to home because it literally hit home, right?
Mhm.
Katrina hit home, Sandy hit home, Benghazi hit our soldiers, Afghanistan hit our Marines, right? So it's much easier for people to get a grasp of what does it mean for someone whom I love or care about to be killed instantly, or for them to be severely injured, or for us to be attacked on a day, than it is to think about the long-term evolution of viruses and gradual exponential growth and transmission around the world that maybe shaves off some part of the population that I might or might not know, right? So much gray area, but you still have the politicians coming up and trying to make decisions, and still have people wanting to criticize the politicians for whatever reasons, good, bad, neutral, uneducated, educated. So you can draw parallels, and it is important to kind of keep that in mind, that the human experience lives on. It's just that the human nature has not changed. It's just that the
Right.
circumstances of this disaster are drawn out and so different than what we're used to internalizing on a regular basis.
Mhm.
Kind of like the frog boiling. We don't notice it. And we need to realize that this is an actual virus planet. I mean, there's more of them than there is of humans. So,
Absolutely.
it's like insects rule the world, viruses rule the world, man doesn't. We just
Oh,
need to learn
absolutely.
how to live in it.
There's an estimate, so just to give the viewers an idea of this. So there's one class of viruses that are believed to be the most abundant are called bacteriophages, right? Literally
Mhm.
bacteria eaters. They're viruses that only infect bacteria. They look like the little, you've probably seen them. Whenever you think of a virus and you think of a little like microscopic robot, right? That's a bacteriophage, right? That's kind of the
Mhm.
classic look to it, right? The estimate is that there's about 10 to the 31 power um, uh, bacteriophages in the planet, which is 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10, all the way to 31. So take 10, add 31 zeros. That's the number of one family of viruses on this planet that infects bacteria. That does not account for the viruses that infect humans, cows, fish, birds, frogs, right? It's the microbial world is teeming with things that we can't even possibly scratch the surface of how complicated it is. And to think that we are in control of it is
Quite
dangerous.
hilarious.
It's not just hilarious,
Hilarious.
it's dangerous, because now with it kind of intersecting it with other issues, climate change, right?
Mm-hmm.
As the planet heats up, one major challenge has actually happened. There's Bacillus anthracis, which is the causative agent of anthrax. There have been variants of that have melted out of permafrost in the upper Yukon in Canada, and in the boreal forests of Russia.
Right.
Different
Mhm.
strains of Clostridium perfringens have killed hundreds of thousands of deer in the steppes of Central Asia that have been emerged. They're as the climate warms, the vectors of disease, the mosquitoes that carry Zika and West Nile are moving further north, right?
Mhm.
Infectious disease is you can't put it in a box. It's part of ecology. You have to understand that
Right.
the global environment, and it's really kind of scary when you think about it, and it is boiling a frog in many ways. You're boiling 10 to the 31 times 10 to the 15 frogs at once, and hoping that everything is going to be fine for the rest of humanity. Like, no, that's not right. But it's not right to say, oh, someone's insane for thinking that, because we don't think about that. We don't talk to the public about that. We don't engage people with that kind of knowledge nearly often enough. But we're very quick to deride people for not being on board with when we say that you guys should just listen to us because we know more. And they're like, prove it, which is a very fair response.
Do prove it, Dan.
Well, and that's the thing, like like we kind of talked about earlier. It's like questioning the science, questioning in science is important, but the idea of questioning science means that you have the ability and the capability and the skills to be able to question specifics. Me being a numbers person, I can question numbers because I know how to analyze them. I know how to look at where information's coming from and make determinations on whether or not samples are biased, or whether or not calculations were done correctly, whether or not the methodology makes sense. That doesn't mean that I have any ability to question, like how your understanding of a virus. I just only know how to question the numbers. And so like this idea of questioning science is great. Absolutely, we got to question the science nonstop, but we still have to have the abilities and the skills and education and reasoning power to be able to question specifics of it, not just say, well, I don't like that, so I'm going to call it questioning and not follow it.
Yeah, and I think the criticism in those, when you're talking about criticizing people who might, disagree or question things without due process or without the right, quote unquote, the right background and the right experience, I think it's really easy to do a lot of lazy dismissal. Like, oh, these people don't know what the hell they're talking about. Just whatever. We're not going to bother talking to them, right? You have to articulate the sources of these issues, and it's really complicated. In some cases, it could be a hyper-fundamentalist church that teaches that the COVID vaccine is the mark of the devil, right? Are all those people stupid and worthless and not worth talking to? No, they're human beings who deserve, good health just like the rest of us. But you have to articulate the problem, which might be, the minister in charge or the culture behind that, or things like that, right? You have to criticize that very articulately. If you have a concern about the political communication about the vaccines, which I'm sure anyone can point out a criticism, right? Because everyone's screwed it up somehow, right? It's very easy to say, oh, the Democrats are just Trump was stupid, or the Republicans have no idea what they're talking about, or Newsmax did it. I know you guys can't see me, but I'm like waving my hands as I talk about that. If you can just like this like Marie Antoinette, let them eat cake. It's easy to do. It's hard to engage in that nuanced criticism that you're talking about. Like, you're going to I feel qualified to criticize the numbers or critique the numbers or have questions about the numbers because I feel qualified about that. That is a lot harder than just saying, oh, those guys are stupid, now I'm going to have a beer.
Right. It's amazing how many people have talked to me about something until they finally said something where it registers to me. And they didn't give up on me. They just said it in a number of different ways until it could relate to me. So, and you're one of those people, Dan. I appreciate it. On a subject similar to that. So YouTube has gone ahead and begun taking misinformation off of its site, which is fascinating. And we were flagged for COVID information. We were reviewed, and they actually added a note to say not only are we not misinformers, but we are actually an authority on it. And that's because of you two. And I really appreciate that, because the moments we have talked about COVID, we have talked from a center perspective, not left, not right, just people, science, and numbers. And I appreciate you both for being here for that.
That's amazing. That made my month, man. I know it's only the third, but still.
No, it is really cool. And I think there needs to be more of us than there is of them. And I think we got some numbers. We got some numbers where we have a chance of winning. But do you think there's a chance of winning this war of misinformation on COVID specifically?
We Americans love to talk about war and declare war on stuff as if it solves the problem.
War on drugs.
Exactly. War on drugs. There's no war on homelessness, as George.
War on abortion. No, I just brought that up. Why don't we hyper focus on 550,000 homeless people until it's gone.
Exactly,
Well,
right? Well, I mean,
if it's anything like the war on drugs, we're just going to end up with more drugs.
Right, right,
exactly.
right.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of political commentary down that rabbit hole, but I
Right.
just think it's interesting. We always talk about the war on misinformation. So there's wonderful classics, and it goes back to what I've learned in my training in infectious disease. There's these
Mhm.
wonderful classic 18th century newspaper cartoons of when the original cowpox vaccine came out for smallpox.
Mhm.
Or Edward Jenner used cowpox, which is closely related. You give people cowpox a vaccine, and then that gives cross protection, right? And when people were talking about the vaccine, there's these amazing cartoons of like people transforming into cows because they had cow injections brought in. It's like, so as long as there's been public health, as long as there's been vaccines, there's always been misinformation. Think about smoking. Think about alcohol. I mean, back when they were trying to mandate seatbelts in cars, there was misinformation about people like choking to death, right?
Mhm.
It's human nature to, and again, I'm not a psychologist, but if anyone has any proof that I'm thinking otherwise, please correct me. But it's human nature to want to criticize and want to be right. And so at some point it's easy just to slip into something that feels easy to understand. It's like, oh well, the vaccine is gene therapy and the government hates me because I don't like paying taxes, right? Having that kind of logical fallacy going through, right? So it's easy to flip in, but as long as there's been public health, as long as there's been disease, there's been misinformation about disease, and there's people who want to profit from it, right? Like Joseph Mercola, right? Oh God, I hope he doesn't sue me for saying this. Multi-million-dollar businessman and pseudoscientist whack job who's made lots of money peddling anti-vaccine lies, and he has a pay-per-click blog that a lot of people subscribe to, and he posts stuff that is verifiably false, but it sounds good and he gets clicks and he gets money in his pocket. So there's the misinformation, which is people just wanting to understand something that is simple or trying to digest the complicated world around them. And then there's the profiteers and the frauds and the scammers that peddle that misinformation for their own personal gain. And it's important for us to talk about those two groups very differently, because if we're going to call this a war, I'd rather declare war on the profiteers and declare humanitarian rescue on those who are getting profiteered from, right?
Hmm,
And there's two different
Right.
missions there.
Yeah.
that makes sense.
So let me ask you something in regards to boosters, because that's in the news as misinformation, but I think it can be resolved pretty easily. Um, Joe Biden came out and said we should get boosters. The CDC said maybe not. The FDA said maybe in certain circumstances. And I think people are basing it on a timeline, as instead of, like Jeffrey and I talked about, the arc of antibodies. So are antibodies waning? Is that what we're looking for? And is there a way to determine your level of antibodies?
Yeah. So again, I'm not a professional immunologist. I have a good amount of immunology training, but
Okay.
I'll try to just display this right. Everyone talks about antibodies because it's kind of the thing that we talk about colloquially the most when it comes to immunology.
Mhm.
Immunology is way, way, way more complicated than whether or not you just have antibodies, right? There's
Right.
antibody-mediated responses by B cells. There's adaptor T cell responses. There's all kinds of complicated stuff that goes on. But immunology in general is a balance, especially when it comes, again, host pathogen interactions, like what I talked about earlier. It's always a balance between what the virus is doing and what the human response immunity is built up to, right? So in some diseases, antibodies wane, some don't. Some you have a fantastic response to, some you don't need a lot of antibodies to actually stimulate a strong enough response. And a lot of that is based on not just the people, but also on the virus itself, how quickly it mutates, how it infects the body, what kind of damage it does to your cells, how it can hijack the immune system, right? It's really complicated, for example, to have any kind of like vaccine therapy or vaccine prevention for HIV, because HIV hijacks the immune system. So there's all
Mm.
kinds of complexity that happens there. So um, antibodies can wane over time for sure. The virus can also mutate so that the antibody virus binding or antibody cell binding that needs to happen is not. It's like a lock and key mechanism, right? You kind of shave
Right.
part of the lock or shave a part of the key. It doesn't quite work so well. So it can happen over time. I think a lot of the booster conversation in general has been morphed by political opinion, and
Me
I don't
too.
want to get on a huge, soapbox about that, but I thought it was telling that there was some hesitation by the scientific consensus of like, not that it was unsafe,
Hmm.
whether or not it was necessary. And then there was the political and politically appointed leadership saying, no, these are necessary because there's a goal. It comes down to messaging and goals, right?
Right.
Joe Biden and the director of CDC, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, they want not just people to be safe from COVID, they want people to feel empowered that they are doing everything they can do to fight. They also might want a political win for themselves, right? I'm not trying to say that in a negative way. This is just trying to understand the humanity of the situation. So
Sure.
if you're talking about having additional boosters, there's no evidence that it's harmful. There's no evidence that that at least for the vaccines that have been developed, there's no evidence that it will make you worse off.
Okay.
It's just a question of whether or not it's needed at this time because of that evolving balance of the host pathogen interactions. Do we have sufficient antibody binding at a high enough concentration? Are those antibodies waning over time, or are they not? Is the virus mutating fast enough so that we need to have these boosters to
Hmm.
overwhelm or to compensate for the kind of the lack of a perfect lock and key mechanism? Because if you have more of antibodies, you can kind of better account for each antibody not being as perfectly tuned.
Right.
So it's complicated because on the immunology side, it doesn't hurt. Is it necessary? Your mileage may vary. On the political side, I can understand the motivation, and I'm not hateful or spiteful against political leaders for making the decisions that they did, because inconclusive, they want to act, they have motivations for acting, but
Hmm.
I don't think it's nefarious. I think it's
Right.
they want there's nothing inherently wrong with wanting the public to feel empowered that they're doing something to fight the pandemic, right? The question is, how are you misleading them, or are you making a decision based on evidence that's publicly available and saying, we're on the fence, but we're going to do this anyway, and it being open and transparent about that. So that's kind of my thoughts on not just antibodies waning, but the booster question in general.
Right. But it could be a large part of that was individual body responses to of ever changing virus. So there's two sliding scales right there, and you need to talk to your physicians maybe about that. So we'll leave it
Yes, definitely,
there.
and that was a lot of the conversation, a lot of the messaging. So there's the two lines that get on your push notifications on your phone from your favorite news source, and then there's the full releases of information.
Right.
The full releases are all like, here's specific subgroups that will most likely do need a booster, and even in the discussion about boosters, there are definitely some populations that could benefit it from it more, like people who are elderly, people who are immune compromised, right?
Exactly.
There's
Frontline workers.
if you're able to yeah, if you're able to if you need a vaccine because you are immune compromised, I mean, if the evidence is not 100% clear of whether or not it will help you, but the evidence is clear that it won't harm you, I
Hmm.
can understand people in that demographic, being encouraged to go get another booster, because if it's not going to hurt you, it might help. It could help. But then the nuance of which subgroups are supposed to get it. And, all of this gets lost behind someone wants to take a swing at Joe Biden, or someone wants to have a
Right.
two-line news push. Some news source wants to be the first entity to publish something. And so they push
Exactly.
out an incomplete story, or the FDA tasked writer A instead of writer B for the press release, and they decided to phrase a particular thing differently, right?
Hmm.
So all these nuances just get lost in this discussion, and I feel that's a societal issue that we don't like nuances often as much as we should.
Right.
Well, then one of the things that I remember that I was reading about too is that when you look at the different vaccines, the vaccines were developed different ways, and one of the things that for example, Moderna went for maximum antibody production, where Pfizer, when they created their dosing, they were looking to minimize side effects of the vaccine. And so one of the questions that has come up that I've seen is that Moderna's protection doesn't seem to wane over time the way that Pfizer's has, but at the same time too, most of what they're seeing waning for Pfizer, most of those populations weren't of concern anyways. Most of those populations were going to be healthy. They still have antibodies within their systems. Like you said, it's just the the issue of who's most at risk: the elderly, the frontline workers, the immunocompromised. And even like the frontline workers one seemed to have been more of a hot button issue, where there was this idea that health professionals didn't need to get it versus they did, and it seemed to get overridden. And I'm not sure if that was more of a political decision or a, hey, we're already at capacity, so the idea of losing any capacity because the efficacy, the effectiveness has waned over time, we probably want to account for that in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and I think the operative term there is or, right? Either or. A lot of the discussion about vaccines in general has kind of descended into like either this or that. Does the vaccine work or does it not? Right. Is COVID gone? Is it not? Is this pandemic over or is it not? It's complicated. And so when the way Jeffrey, like the way you brought that up was really, I'm glad that you discussed it in the way that you did, which is there were some political components, or was it, science-based? Was there some evidence that was needed? It's not clear because all of those factors were played a role, right? You can talk about the different types, the pros and cons of the different vaccines, and what Pfizer and Moderna's end goals, talk about end goals, what the end goals for them were, and what we want out of the pandemic as a whole. But when you try to descend this whole conversation into like, okay, should I or should I not get the vaccine? Should I or should I not wear a mask? Should I, like, the binary nature is, again, one of the major reasons why we're having such a difficult time relating to the public, because there's nothing binary about a virus, right? Does the virus infect or does it not? Well, it only infects certain types of cells depending on what type you have this subtype of receptor A, right? You lose people, right? And it's understandable because it's so hard to condense these issues into something digestible, because it's impossible to give this issue the nuance it deserves in one sentence.
Absolutely, and especially
people
when you're
aren't general. People aren't general. They're all individual, and things affect them differently. Sorry, Jeffrey.
Oh yeah, no, and especially when you're trying to help people understand what does affecting people look like. Normally when we think about a vast multitude of diseases, we have this preconceived notion that it's this subgroup of people. It's old people, it's immunocompromised people, it's people who are obese. But what we're finding with this virus is you've got perfectly healthy people that are passing away, while you've got people who are, in all of these comorbidities that you would normally consider you most likely to go. There are the ones there, you've got people there that are surviving terrible cases of the virus, but people who were completely healthy gone within a week. And, that being able to explain that to people has, I think, been one of the more difficult things, in that the predictability of the virus seems to be a lot less predictable than what we've been used to, and being able to scientifically explain why it's affecting populations the way that it is, why we don't have necessarily the clearest picture on who's getting it, who's dying from it, why is it this group of people right now versus another group of people with the last variant. I think people are getting frustrated with the fact that they see the virus, they see it like the goalposts are moving when it's the virus has evolved. So yeah, in a way the goalposts have moved, but it's not necessarily because of political movement. It's because the virus itself actually changed, and now we're having to learn what the goalposts are for this particular variant.
You're absolutely right.
Isn't science constantly moving a goalpost, though? Shouldn't you want it to have more information the more we learn about it?
Well, it depends on what you mean by the goalpost, right? So in some cases you want, you don't want the principles of science for the goalpost moved, right? You want scientists to act with integrity. You want them to have good research ethics. You want the peer-reviewed studies to be criticized fairly. You want people to be reporting data honestly, not defrauding, having all those things in place. It's important to have those things.
Right.
It's important to have those things. I'm sorry, I have a puppy just came onto my couch.
That's fine.
Go away. She's really cute.
Knowledge is an evolution, though, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, so
learning about
the principles of science are important to keep in there, but the knowledge will move. Unfortunately, when it comes to folks who, do you have just a puppy issue as well?
Yes, I have a puppy issue. This is Billy.
Hi, Billy. Hello, handsome boy. But what happens is, for folks who aren't really steeped in the scientific culture, and it really is a culture more than as a profession, when they see the goalpost moving, they also they think that maybe the scientists are just trying to account for maybe they were kind of wrong before. Now they're trying to continue to be right.
Right.
Because that's a very political, like politicians love to do that too, like move those goalposts. And it comes down to the fact that, and Lisa, this is speaking personally, going back to that middle school, high school science class. Science to most people who take a science class is a bunch of facts about the world that you need to memorize and regurgitate onto a test.
Right. Static.
Right. Whereas
Static.
it's static truth.
Right.
Facts.
Black, white.
The reality is that science is a process. It's the method and the protocols and the ideas and the things that the goalposts should stay true is the process.
Mhm.
We don't teach process, we teach product in school because it's easier to put into a standardized test. And
Right.
so when you have millions and millions of people whose only kind of familiarity with science is that like memorization, there is an answer, and then you present them with an issue where people who are trying to speak the best truth that they can based on the best available evidence get things kind of right and then have to change their answers as more evidence becomes available. It's no wonder there's this incompatibility, right? And again, it comes down to how we're teaching science, how we're doing outreach, how we're engaging with the public to make sure that before something happens, the preventative measure of saying, this is what needs to be, this is what science is in reality. Like behind every single answer we give you is a process and a debate and a discussion. And because all of this is being scrutinized so heavily in the public eye, these are things, host pathogen interactions for viruses, people spend their whole careers understanding one subtype of one interaction between virus A and one type of host.
And that's based on the subjects that you can examine, right? The more cases you have, the more knowledge you have. If you have one case of COVID, you assume that it's one way, it's killing in one way.
Exactly,
if you have 100, you can learn more.
Yeah, and that's as you get further out to the population level, you can start having more one sentence answers, and that's the importance of one of the aspects of science is like having good data collection, right? And why we listen to or pay attention more to the meta-analyses of 3 million patients than we do about a single case report about a weird thing that happened with one person. But because the personal experience is more relatable to most people, that is what kind of jars you. Because when you talk about one person, I'm not trying to praise Stalin in any way, but what was the thing he said? It's like one single death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic.
Right.
The metaphor for that being you can relate to that one person at the other end of the case report. You can't relate to the population of 3 million anonymous people who participated in a trial to answer a broad-facing question about whether or not there's generally more or generally less risk at a population level. That's hard for people to relate to, but that's what we have to do when making policy decisions that affect 350 million Americans.
Good point.
Yeah.
So we have this study from the UK that I actually wanted to get you to talk about more of the long symptoms of COVID, the long haulers. And they're saying that the people they're examining they're finding organ damage, at least one organ damage in everyone that they've examined. And how do you know that? How do you know it wasn't from before? How do you know that this is because of COVID? And what are some other things we should be looking out for? I want to scare people into getting the vaccine by letting them know that there's possibilities things could go wrong if they don't.
Sorry, my unmute button wasn't working.
You got it.
Good question.
Should we be scared of long hauler syndrome?
Scared? Oh man. I'm a nuanced boy, right?
It's October. It's Halloween. Let's scare them straight.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the thing is like if you give people fear and then they feel that it wasn't worth being afraid of, that just sows distrust.
Gotcha.
But generally talking about long COVID, yeah, it is something that we're just barely able to understand, right? The chronic complications of COVID, just because we're barely into 2 years since this virus likely, started breaking into the population in Hubei province in China. Wow, 2 years. But again, these kinds of diseases, like I mentioned earlier, these are individual scientists' careers. Someone could spend 30 years studying, one type of disease, whether infectious or like melanoma or some type of kidney disease. Like those are entire careers that people sink their teeth into and only make some progress on. So when it comes to long COVID, there are these observational studies. There is kind of statistically significant enrichment of this organ damage in people who had COVID and then reported long-term symptoms of COVID. But then in order to understand that more, we need to study more. Okay, how did did this virus directly infect someone's kidney or liver, or
That's
was
what I
there
want to
kind
know,
of
right?
systemic damage? Was there kind of an antibody cross-reactivity autoimmune response? All these nuanced questions, and the science needs time to understand all of that. But right now, all we have right now are these cross-sectional observational studies, and by cross-sectional I mean like point in time, right? There's, you can have prospective studies where you like study a group of people in who are participating over time. There's
Mm-hmm.
retrospective studies where you like have a group of data that you look back in time, and cross sectional, which is like in there's someone in a point in time, you get information from them, right? And how those studies contribute to science also messes with the question. So if this is a cross sectional study of like, hey, they have this organ damage and they have long COVID previously,
Right.
that doesn't really that might start to show an association, but until you track people for a long period over time and really start to understand the symptoms that they get and the diseases and conditions they get over time as they evolve, that takes a long time and a lot of money and a lot of effort from a lot of people in order to get that valuable information. So in terms of scaring people, we shouldn't be scaring people, we should be informing them. Long COVID is a thing. Long COVID, we know, we have sufficient information that COVID for some people is not just a week or 10-day cold and you move on with your life. It's not just something that you get asymptomatically and then pass on to somebody else and it's not really your problem anymore. There are long-term consequences to this, and also from acute disease as well as chronic disease. We're getting more information. It's more and more evidence that people should get vaccinated for a lot of reasons, mainly about protecting yourself from the virus. And I can get into more detail about that. There's a lot of really good evidence coming out to support vaccination, but we need more time to understand these processes as they evolve, quite literally, and get more evidence. And unfortunately for science, that takes years. We're just not used to having to answer to the public on such a broad scale so immediately about so many questions at once, and we're just not equipped to answer all those questions at once.
No, and absolutely correct. And the fact of the matter is that even when we're able to finally form, something that we can say to people, we're usually having to battle social media at that point. And the sound bites from pundits and politicians and news sources. And so like I think like kind of one of those things that you've gone back to is that our ability to message has just been, well, asked, for the lack of a better term. We're just not able to get the same level of quick, easy messaging out to the population that we've seen spread through social media.
You're absolutely right. And that's something that, again, because that takes time to instill in people, and the appreciation for that value, right? Social media has been around for a while, a hot minute, right? And people who recognize the most successful marketers of those, or the largest companies that have built themselves in social media, including the social media companies themselves, are those who recognize early, hey, this is what the potential can be, and let's have a 5 to 10 year plan to build this out, right?
Yes.
Science does not have a 5 to 10 year plan on how it's going to evolve its communication about COVID. Science does not have a 5 to 10 year plan about how we're going to train more science communicators who are not just well versed in the science, but also well versed in public outreach. Science does not have a 5 to 10 year plan on how we're going to get more people out of the lab and value the importance of getting more people into the public eye to answer those difficult, nuanced questions and to get people thinking about the process of science, like we talked about before. When you don't have a long-term plan, you're not going to have a good solution. That's just the reality of no matter what discipline you're in, be it like military operations to business planning and entrepreneurship to just running a school. Right? If you don't have a long-term plan and a mission and a goal, there's no end in sight, right? You don't have a clear definition. So I think that's something that science needs to learn from, is that as we publish these studies, we also, if not more so, need to be telling the public there's going to be a lot of studies coming out, right? People are still studying and making careers off of studying the 2009 H1N1 pandemic flu, because all kinds of viral stocks for that exist. And it's a pretty standard, basis for studying influenza now. Everyone and their dog who's in the field has a bunch of vials of that they thaw out of their freezer and study by passaging in cells and seeing what happens, right? COVID is going to be a reality in science for the next forever. So we
Forever.
need to start messaging COVID is going to be reality in science for the next forever. And we're going to be having these this is a whole new field of science that's been created. And nobody's really telling people that. That's a really
Right.
serious challenge that we have. It's like, this is going to continue. As COVID continues, we're going to continue studying it. And people are going to make a lot of impact over a long-term career because COVID's not going away. And as COVID's not going away, the hospitalizations and deaths are going to continue. Every year people die from the flu. Every year people die from other viruses. Something we need to be prepared for. And science needs to get on its horse to start talking about how and where and when it's going to intercede and where it's going to provide those updates, not just giving the updates themselves out of the blue and not giving people context and how to interpret the information.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I think that's one of the things that we're going to have to start telling people too is how do you make a game plan as a family, in order to keep this up. I mean, I don't know that we necessarily had that level of this level of information or thought process, and how do you deal with this in, like, for example, a public health, public school setting, like something that's a very real issue for all of us, where you've got, school age children 5 to 11 who can't get the vaccine yet. But, like here, for example, one of our schools is remote for the next 2 weeks because they have an outbreak.
Good.
So the question becomes, what do families need to do in order to game plan for what this pandemic is going to continue to look like until we no longer call it a pandemic? And I think, number one is going to be, what does your vaccination plan and home health plan look like? What are things you can do at home to make sure that you still have a fighting chance until, like we've talked about, this thing, gets to a form that's less lethal. And we're not constantly wondering if hospitals are going to have a bed for a person if they absolutely need it.
Yeah, I think even more fun. All the questions, all the points that you raised are exceptionally on point and things we all need to be discussing. But I think there's a more fundamental point that needs to be digested by the public before we have any of those discussions. And that is the reality that this is not the first time this has happened. In terms of a major public health crisis like the 1918 flu pandemic, all kinds of different things. The reality is that whenever something like this happens, we never go back to normal. There's always a new normal. There's a readjustment. There's what we're going to be facing moving forward is not going to be the same as what we had before, right? Thinking back to the history of the 1918 pandemic. After that kind of subsided, there was a massive injection of funding at the federal and state level to start caring about public health. And a lot of the public infrastructure that we have today is due to funding and investment that happened. The federal government took note. There was more legislation that was passed in terms of structure. Very important Supreme Court rulings about the cans and cannots or do's and do nots of public health practice. All kinds of research became available, and that changed our society. After the Second World War, I mean, after the discovery of penicillin and the Second World War, penicillin became very widely available because it was shipped over to the Allies in such large quantities because of all the infections that people were getting, soldiers were getting in combat, that it became, once the war effort stopped, we now had antibiotics that fundamentally changed the way that we treated all kinds of health, right? And going through these decades, the questions you're raising about how are we going to manage remote work, how are we going to manage people from home from school, how are we going to manage isolation and quarantine? Do we need to continue isolating and quarantine once we get a vaccine regimen in? Are we going to be concerned about the evolution of the virus? How's that's going to continue? All these things have to come. We have to ask those questions. We have to be willing to engage in those discussions. But there first has to be an acceptance that we're not going back to what early 2020 before looked like. This is going to be a new normal. We are in a new society. We have changed just as much as we did after 9/11, just as much as we did after World War II, just as much as we did after the 1918 pandemic, right? Society will continue to move forward. We need to accept that and then start asking those questions. And that's a really hard pill to swallow if, again, you're in some country town where you don't really know anyone who's gotten COVID and you don't want the world to change because life's kind of good for the way you see it. It's hard to get that message through.
Absolutely. And realistically speaking, it's, it's going to be one of those things where our messaging is going to have to adjust, like you've talked about, and we're just going to have to get used to, the fear mongers on any side of the political spectrum being willing to ship us doom and gloom in any part, and figuring out how do you minimize those voices. Realistically speaking, this thing's going to be a lot more manageable. In time, it will be a lot more manageable.
But not gone. Not gone.
Not gone. Never gone. And the new normal, like Dan says, is going to be, whatever your individual risk assessment looks like. At some point it's going to be masks off. At some point it's going to be back to sitting down in a restaurant eating around people. At some point it's going to be back to large family gatherings and concerts, and our evaluation of the risks individually are going to change. Some people are going to be willing to take, well, they're not going to see it as a risk, and some people won't see it as a risk because they're vaccinated. Some people won't see it as a risk because whatever else. And the reality is going to be that everybody's risk calculation is going to be different, and we're just going to have to accept that. You're just going to have to learn how to minimize and mitigate for your own risks and what that looks like.
And then policymakers needing to be aware of how to look at the larger level and say, what is the balance of risk mitigation with public inconvenience? That's always been the fundamental question of public health policy and public health law, right? That balance between, public health policy is restrictions on public freedoms that are deemed necessary to prevent people from dying needlessly, right? That's just the baseline definition of it. That's always been the battle. We go back even, obviously we, go back to the 18th century with the United States, but way, way before, the whole point of quarantine, like quarantine was initially, it was Genoa or Milan or Venice, right? Ships from the Middle East and from the Near East were quarantined for 40 days, quarantine, right? Stay in place for 40 days off coast to let any diseases run their course, mainly smallpox, before the sailors were allowed to board the ships or to come off the ships and come to land. So public health policy has been in place as long as people have known that diseases are a thing. And it's always been a battle between what are people's rights and privileges to make the individual decisions that they want, and the necessity of government to step in when the greater good needs to be protected. And because of everyone's individual beliefs, politically, that's a different balance for everyone. Is going to have a different, set of opinions on that. And so we need to have policymakers who understand that is going to continue to battle and continue to prioritize public health, because I guarantee you, I've said this before, I'll say it again, I will bet my life savings that before I am gone from this planet, barring some serious traffic accident or something, that we will have a much, 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 much worse pandemic than we did from COVID. It's kind of like the U.S. Geological Survey not allowing its drivers, its members, to drive on elevated highways in the Bay Area around San Francisco because they know a major earthquake's going to hit. It's the same thing. We know another major pandemic is going to hit sometime in the future, sometime in living memory. So what lessons can we draw forward from this? A lot of that has to happen at the policy table. It's not just scientists siloed in labs, in the disaster movies, giving people warnings that are ignored. Scientists need to break out of that and say, engage with policymakers, and policymakers need to be listening. So that's kind of the major message that we need to think of in this new normal, is this needs to be incorporated into our mainstream kind of structure as a society that we can prepare and kind of converse in on a regular basis.
Absolutely.
I love that. Do you think that you say there's going to be another bigger pandemic, but do you think this one was as big just because of the response that we initially had? Did it only get big because we ignored it?
It could have been so much worse.
That's okay.
We could have had millions and millions of Americans dead if we didn't have the initial shutdown.
Okay.
Right. Think of it this way. We know that the vaccines work really well. We know that people are going back to normal. I'm starting to go, my life is starting to go back to, I don't want to say back to normal, like have a new normal where I'm careful with my friends. I'm not, if I ever get the sniffles, I'm not going out for a while. I'm going to go get tested, right? All those new things. But speaking personally, I am making some of those decisions to spend time with friends whom I also know are vaccinated and being responsible. And as I evolve that out, right? But if we know the vaccines are there, and we know that some people are making more responsible decisions now, but we're still kind of opening up. We're still seeing the surge in cases with Delta. Imagine what would have happened if we just didn't shut down. Right? Think of the death toll that we're facing now. All that stuff about flattening the curve. What is it? Idaho and Alberta, Canada are now doing triage, like scarcity treatment of their patients. Like they're not like like every patient coming in is a DNR, and like, again, I don't know all the details, so people fact check me on that, but that could have been completely what was happening in New York City could have been the entire country at once if we did not shut down.
Okay.
Yep.
Right. So, and the shutdown was absolutely devastating, right? Millions of people left, not just lost their jobs, but left the workforce. It caused a massive recession. The stock market went crashing down, right? We had these major systemic issues. Now, what are we as a society going to do knowing that there could be something that's 10 times worse with an actual mortality rate of like 10% as opposed to like the 0.5 to 0.9% that people estimate for COVID? How are we going to prepare for that? What kind of systems are we going to have in place to make sure that we can actually continue to function as a society and not be crippled for decades by something really severe? Because back in 1918, I'm in Pittsburgh, and there was some of the Pittsburgh earliest Pittsburgh trolleys were converted into corpse carts, where people would just like leave their dead family members out on the sidewalks, and the corpse cart would come pick them up. Like, how you do, and now with the way how complicated and integrated our society is, like, if that happened, if that was a reality, how would we survive as a society? Right? We need to start asking those questions now, and that has to be people stepping up and saying, look, this was a dress rehearsal. The next big one is on the horizon. We thought this was the next big one. In some ways it was, in some ways it definitely wasn't, and we need to be prepared for that. So I mean, I'm not trying to inspire fear like I mentioned earlier, but maybe that's something that our listeners can consider, is like, what kind of leaders do we want in our country who are going to acknowledge that fact and be prepared for it? What kind of leaders are going to want to start integrating public health discussions more into policy making? How is that going to affect our economic policy, our social policy? Because we need to be prepared for that reality that's going to happen eventually. And we need to be the first step is talking about it, but people need to be thinking about it and engaged with that, hard, like that uncomfortable idea. I don't want to say an inconvenient truth, but it does come to mind, that phrase.
I got you. So claiming it's false isn't our way out of it. Planning ahead is.
Yeah.
Can I ask?
Don't ostrich the situation. This is only going to get worse.
Right. I wanted to ask you about Merck created a new pill that hopefully disrupts COVID. Do you know anything about that? Because I really would like to finish up on therapeutics, if that's okay.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's before we go into the details of this, I mean, because obviously this is integrated into the ongoing, sentiments about hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin and all these other drugs, right?
Oh, and nebulizing hydrogen peroxide. Don't forget that one.
Oh yeah, and drinking bleach.
Oh yeah, right. And UV light
injecting
being
bleach,
injected.
Yeah. All that great stuff, right?
Oh my God.
Yeah, I know.
But there is therapeutics that work, and I think we should steer people to those if we can.
So I think it's important before we go into that discussion to talk about the fundamental difference in philosophy between vaccines and therapeutics, right? Vaccines are designed fundamentally to prime your immune system to be able to take care of a virus by itself once you have been exposed, right? And exposure means you are technically, some of your cells are infected, right? You're like, as soon as virus gets into your body, it could get in, right? Exposure, it's not like you go from exposure to, oh my God, you're sick. Like, there's a process of some cells in your body getting infected, right? But vaccines are designed to stimulate an immune response that suppresses the amount of virus that your body can make by being able to quickly respond, to detect and respond to an infection. A therapeutic, like the drug that Merck just popularized, I don't even remember the name. There's some standard naming system for viruses. So Avir, like that suffix is like, antiviral. Anything like MAB, something that the technical name ends with MAB, is a monoclonal antibody, and then like HUMAB. HUMAB is a human monoclonal antibody. MUMAB is a mouse. ZUMAB is a different type of, there's all kinds of standard definitions. But anyways, so a therapeutic, you get infected. Sorry, I just lost my infection. Can you guys hear me? Oh, yeah, I think
there we go.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Sorry, I lost my audio connection. So there's the vaccines that are designed to stop or to quickly recognize and nip in the bud an infection by your own immune system working for itself. And the therapeutics, your immune system can't handle it. You get really sick. You have a very high viral load, and then you add something to your body to try and help your immune system catch up, right? And it's pretty obvious which one is preferable, right? the vaccines are always, having a good vaccine is always a better bet
Yes.
than having a good therapeutic. Because first of all, if you have a vaccine, if you can keep that viral load low, then there's less of a chance of you pushing virus out into the environment and infecting other people. There's also less of a chance of you getting severely ill, and there's less of a chance of you needing additional medical care.
Right.
But when you have a therapeutic, you've already probably at the point where you've exposed somebody else, and you're already at the point where you probably need some kind of substantial intervention where you're really down for the count and need a lot of help. So something to keep in mind there. All that having been said, so this therapeutic is a nucleoside analog, and I need to look into more of it. But there's different ways that the antiviral drugs work, but all of them mess with your cells. Because viruses, the way that viruses reproduce is they infect your cells and they hijack them to be little factories for viruses, right? They're not like bacteria, where some bacteria live inside your cells, different story, but most of them will grow out like in your body, but outside your cellular tissue and cause like a large mass of stuff that like causes a big problem, right? Viruses use your cells directly, and that's why you have very few antiviral drugs on the market to begin with, right? Antibiotics, we have a bunch of them. Different conversation for another day, because you can actually design drugs to just kill the bacteria, because bacteria are fundamentally different from us in many ways. So you can design a drug that like kills a bacteria but not our cells. There's no way to design an antiviral drug that doesn't go into your cells, right? It has to go into your cells. It has to mess with the replication, the cellular machinery that you have, because that's what the virus is using. And so you have like these nucleoside or nucleotide analogs that are designed to literally stop or throw a monkey wrench into the engines that make your cells DNA and RNA, right? That's not a good thing. Like that, there's always side effects to that. There's also there's other variants that maybe you can stop binding or anything by blocking like receptors in your cells. But again, that's working on your cells, stopping them from working properly. So therapeutics are useful. They have a place. Obviously, remdesivir has saved like countless lives in hospital settings. Hydroxychloroquine obviously didn't pan out. Ivermectin, huge debate. This one could be a useful addition to the arsenal for people who don't want to get a vaccine, or who do get vaccine and get very sick in that rare case. But it's something to keep in mind is that the therapeutic is essentially, it's useful, but in some ways it is a really potent poison for your own cells, where it's kind of like chemo in a way. Like chemo works by killing your own cells and the cancer, right? But antiviral drugs work by messing with your cells to stop the virus. There's always collateral damage. With a vaccine, the level of collateral damage for a well-designed vaccine is always going to be lower than that of an antiviral drug. So something to keep in mind when you're like, if you're hesitant to get a vaccine, but you really want to get this new antiviral from Merck that goes inside your cells and messes with your cellular machinery, right?
Your DNA, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure about DNA in this case, but some DNA viruses, you have antivirals that will mess with your DNA replication machinery, right? So it can get messy. This one probably RNA, but still, right? It gets messy in there.
Yeah.
So
and these are short-term solutions too. These are not long-term. These are like you're down for the count. This is something that you're needing in order to address the situation now, and it's not something you're staying on, and it's not something that's going to give you long-lasting protection.
Absolutely, it's not long-lasting protection, and by the time you've already gotten the therapeutic, you've probably exposed somebody else to the virus. And the it's like the standard dose for this is like 800 milligrams of like a nucleoside inhibitor.
Wow.
With your machinery, as opposed to like, what is it, like 0.3 micrograms of mRNA in the vaccine dose,
right?
Like the sheer volume. And they talk about like the same thing with like the Regeneron therapeutics that Ron DeSantis was peddling. It's like the other thing is that Merck is applying these data for an emergency use authorization. The Regeneron therapeutics that are developed are different science, but still emergency use authorization, right? Why are you lapping up an EUA drug that is way more potent and potentially toxic to your body than you are to a vaccine, which is either FDA approved or has been authorized and out for months and months with lots of evidence showing that it's safe, that has a lower dose of whatever it's giving you, offers longer term protection, and prevents the problem from happening in the first place.
I'm glad you said that. I'm really glad you said it that way.
So good on Merck for offering another tool in this fight. I applaud them. Well done. I hope it gets authorized as long as the data hold up. But it's important to keep in mind that this is not a replacement for vaccines, and that vaccines are the superior option. Always, it's what's the old adage? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Yep.
Perfect. And you said that the ivermectin, that's a big debate. That's not a big debate, right? Ivermectin isn't something that we want to use against COVID.
Yeah, so there's
I don't want to. I don't want to talk about. Don't use it.
Oh no.
Can we just say don't use it?
So there's the don't use the freaking veterinary horse ivermectin, please. Like that's
right.
Don't dip into your local farmer's stash of nematode killer. But there is some evidence out there. It's mixed about whether or not like human formation of ivermectin might or might not work. The jury's kind of out. And so my personal opinion on ivermectin is that like we should continue to study it in the human dosage. But again, it comes out to this messaging. If someone comes out, ivermectin is the next great thing. You can go to Petco and get it for $3 a pound. And it's like, okay. And these same people were like yelling at the millennials for doing the Tide Pod challenge. Right.
Right.
So it comes down to like when used properly and studied properly, I don't think the evidence is as conclusively bad. I mean, there's the ivermectin project, which have some RCTs, randomized controlled trials that show that it could potentially be effective. But again, how does that come into practice? Well, if you're just going to have the veterinary formulation, which is not the same,
right?
Is going to self-dose instead of going to a doctor. If the doctor is going to prescribe without understanding the mechanics of that drug, or if you're going to rely on that, even though it's not even authorized, not even approved, not even reviewed by the FDA, not even recommended by the FDA, as opposed to a vaccine that has gone through multiple rounds of retrospective reviews and peer-reviewed studies and all this stuff. Like the evidence for vaccination is so much is much more robust, a lot more. And hundreds of millions of people have gotten the vaccine. So we have kind of the test group that we're already studying and showing that it's effective. So again, good to have antiviral drugs. Good to have that as part of our arsenal. But prevention is so much more valuable, and the vaccines are fundamentally a protective and preventative tool. So that's why I will always recommend the vaccines over just relying on it. Now, if you're sick and you need it, don't take this advice like, oh, don't get the drug, right? But always opts to get a vaccine over just hoping that the cure might work for you.
Yeah. I think people are working overtime to avoid a vaccine when you could just be done. Like, I got the vaccine, I don't worry as much. I still care about who's surrounding me, but in my daily life, I don't need to protect myself in a lockdown scenario like I did. The vaccine has helped me. And there's people that are actually working to avoid the vaccine, and they're hurting themselves to do it just to prove a point that they don't need the vaccine. Just get the vaccine.
Yeah, and there's also lots of people who are still worried about the vaccine because they've heard horror stories, or they're concerned about the whole process, and trying to make sure that when those people come to those of us who care with those kind of concerns, like I don't want to get the vaccine because I've heard this really messy thing, and I wanting to come from that place of like vulnerability, learning, doubt, concern. Those are people that we should be engaging with and trying to get really reliable evidence and listening to the concerns and showing that we're valued. Again, talking about what I mentioned before about like having a war on misinformation, right? You can viciously attack the peddlers of false information, the people who profit, the people who promote it, but the people who listen to it and have their concerns, take a humanity first approach, right? You gotta treat these people with respect, because their concerns and their doubts are exceptionally valid. They deserve to be treated with respect, and that is how we're going to make progress in this pandemic, is treating people with that dignity that they inherently deserve.
Absolutely. And I find that the best way that I've been able to help people figure out what they need to do next, I've got a friend who's been struggling because on one side they had a sister get Bell's palsy from getting the vaccine. That absolutely happened. I mean, everything has an inherent risk. But on the other side, also had a family member damn near died because she was unvaccinated, and they had to life flight her eventually, and she's scared because on one side, she's seen the reaction that a family member's had, and on the other side, she's seen someone almost die and talk about how it's the worst thing that they've ever experienced. And the reality is that Facebook is not a substitute for going and talking to your doctor about your concerns and
Right.
getting actual information, doing tests to see if you actually are somebody who can get the vaccine. Medical exemptions need to be something that we really need to look into for people who really can't get the vaccine, because that's why we all got vaccinated to begin with before this whole COVID thing ever came around. We knew that there were people that were never going to be able to get the vaccine. And as part of our societal responsibility was making sure that we created as few vectors as possible for those people who were compromised, so that way they didn't get sick. And that's still fundamentally the same thing as it is today. The vaccines, are they perfect? Absolutely not. Not a single one of them has been. There are always going to be inherent risks. It's just that, what is your level of risk exception? Is it going to be ending up dead in a hospital? Or is it going to be, potentially having a side effect from a vaccine? And the best way that you can get yourself into a place of being able to make a decision, talk to your doctor.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said.
There's 7 billion people. There's one vaccine. So, the
There's
variables.
three vaccines. There's three vaccines.
The 3, maybe 4 soon, but the variables are in the humans, not really the vaccine as much. You know what I mean?
Actually, I stand corrected. It's like 15 vaccines.
Is there already?
Yeah, I mean, I talk about Sinopharm and AstraZeneca and all the other ones in Russia's version. So,
Sputnik. That's right.
But point well taken is that there is this amazing tool. There are these amazing tools out there. It's important for us to use those tools properly, and the first step of that is humanizing the problem that they're designed to solve. So, yeah,
I love it. Thanks for being here, Dan.
Of course. Thank you so much. And congratulations on such a huge milestone for your episodes. And, feel free to message me if you guys want me to be back and talk more about COVID stuff or non-COVID stuff. Yep. I'm very happy to support the show. And I'm super proud of all the hard work you guys have put in to put together such a great show that's run for so long and had such success. So I tip my metaphorical cap to you, because I'm not wearing any hat right now, but still. Well done. Dan. Bravo. Cheers. Bravo.
And you're invited back next week, and the week after, and the week after, and the week
after. Wonderful. All right.
Well, I want to get to before we leave, I want to get to a broader conversation about vaccines instead of just COVID. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Like we used to have those conversations, and now we're hyper focused on one situation. But what about shingles, and what about measles, and all these other things? So we need to attack the anti-vaxxers at some point beyond just COVID.
Absolutely. So and again, talking about the anti-vaxxers versus the vaccine hesitant, and those people are very different, right? The people who are actively spreading misinformation and not willing to engage in meaningful discourse versus those who are concerned because they've heard some stuff, right? And vaccines have been a vital tool for our progress as a society. They've stopped us from they've eradicated smallpox. They damn near they have eradicated polio from our population. They've effectively eradicated rabies from our house pets. We've effectively nullified so many other diseases. It's a constant method throughout modern history of us to be able to live society as we take it for granted now. And this whole COVID scare has been an important kind of dress rehearsal, but an important reminder of what can happen if we do have a devastating disease that we don't have a good preventive measure for. Because scientists have been working so hard behind the scenes for so much time to make sure something like this doesn't happen. But here's the thing: we're gonna fail. We failed with COVID. We failed with every new disease that's going to come out. There's going to be something way worse than COVID that's going to come out by whatever means, in our lifetimes. It's going to happen, and that's not because scientists suck. It's just the environment that we live in is so complicated. It's a living, breathing, incredibly dynamic ecosystem, and as spillover keeps happening, we're gonna keep threatening. So we need to continue supporting the development of vaccines and other preventative measures that we can integrate. So.
I love it. Plan ahead or fall behind.
Indeed.
All right. Well, thank you for being here. Thank you, Jeffrey, for being here.
Oh,
Did you have any final thoughts before we go? No. All right. And whenever you're free, Dan, whenever you're free, thank you for your service, Dan.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate,
I don't talk about what you do or where you've been or where you're going to go, but I do know that you're going all around the country, stopping and preventing and saving and learning, and I really appreciate you for that.
Well, I'm happy to do it. And a last thing, always a good health tip: drink lots of water, everyone. Stay hydrated. You can't go wrong with that.
My roommate says the same thing to me because there's a message every day at 4 that says drink more water, so it's a running joke. It's a running joke around here. Are you feeling bad? Drink more water.
There you go. All right, take care, gentlemen. Thank you so much, and congratulations again.
Thanks, Dan.
Bye-bye.
All right, and end the live stream. All right, thank